But we will start with 1814, and we'll start at the beginning of 1814. And at that time, Britain was conducting a war on two fronts, one in the Americas and the other across the Atlantic, or across the Channel, particularly with France in Europe. And in April of 1814, Napoleon was defeated. He was thrown in jail and abdicated. And it offered the British an opportunity to come across the Channel or the Atlantic and end the war in America. And they thought they were going to end the war and that the Americans would be back under the rule of the British thumb. And June 30th of April 14, James Madison, the president, received messages from envoys in England saying that the British were contemplating an attack upon the America's capital. Well, Madison immediately called together his cabinet to see what to do about British possible invading of the city. The British began gathering ships in the Chesapeake Bay. And this was a large amount of ships. I call it an armada. It was maybe 56, 58 ships. We're talking large sailing vessels with lots and lots of guns on them. They meant business. So the British got together a three-point plan for the possible, and get that word, possible, invasion to the city of Washington. The first part of the plan was they sent two ships to the upper Chesapeake, up above Baltimore, under the command of Captain Peter Parker. And these two ships were to harass the coastline up above Baltimore and keep the militia forces up there in case they were called down to the city of Washington if necessary. They sent 7 ships, very large ships, up the Potomac River under the command of Captain James Gordon. I mean, these were large ships and they had lots of guns, lots of heavy guns. They went up the Potomac River. The rest of their fleet went up the Patuxent River and anchored off of Benedict, Maryland on August 18. August 19th, they unloaded about 5,000 British regular troops and maybe 1,000 sailors and Marines. And on that same day, August 19th, they began a march up the Patuxent River. They were each soldier was carrying 60 to 80 pounds. Now this is August.
Serve them right, mercy.
Well, think what they were wearing. They were wearing those uniforms that we see, those heavy woolen uniforms. And they have all of that to go up the Patuxent River. They were not after the city of Washington. They were after a fleet of gunboats commanded by Commodore Joshua Barney. Barney had 17 gunboats with heavy guns. Keep in mind, they don't have any artillery here once they left the ships. Barney's gunboats had heavy guns, 17 of them, 17 gunboats. And he was harassing the British in the Chesapeake Bay earlier in the summer. And the British felt that they couldn't accomplish anything in the Chesapeake Bay until they got rid of the gunboats. And so Barney had gotten trapped in the Patuxent. He had made the mistake of going up there with his 17 boats, and the British said, "Aha," and they blocked him off. So as the British are going forward, Barney is going backwards. As the British go forward the next day, Barney is going backwards. And this goes on for a couple of days until August 21. All the while, the Americans are watching. They're doing zero. Well, that's exaggerating, but they're not doing anything. But they are gathering militia forces. Anyway, while the troops are gathering and the Americans are watching, August 21st comes and Barney can go no further up in the river because it's gotten shallower and shallower. and he was under orders of the Naval Secretary that if he couldn't go any further, and the British found the ships, he was to have them blown up. Now keep in mind, we have all the ammunition here. The British don't have any ammunition once they're away from their ships, but we are going to blow up our gunboats. This is basically our Navy in the Chesapeake Bay. We didn't really have a Navy at this point, and our gunboats were it, and they were new. It was a huge expense to the government, and we're going to blow them up. The Americans watched. They knew immediately when they heard the explosions that the city of Washington would probably be next. The way was open for the British to advance. But they just waited, and militia forces came in. Winder had troops from Baltimore, about 2,200, and they advanced down to Bladensburg, and the Baltimore troops began to set up some batteries on the western side of the Eastern Branch River at Bladensburg. And the Eastern Branch River was the eastern branch of the Potomac. It's now called the Anacostia River. So Baltimore's coming down to set up some defensive measures at Bladensburg. The British have eliminated the gunboats, and they go over to an area called Melwood, or Upper Marlborough, and they make camp, and they rest. And they send a note back to their commander waiting in the Patuxent. And the note basically said, we have accomplished our mission. We will await further orders. On the morning of August 24th, 1814, and I say the morning, I'm going to say a.m., it's about 1 a.m. in the morning, the British receive a reply from their commander that was waiting in the Patuxent. And the reply said, "Return to the ships." So in other words, the British marched upon the city of Washington against orders. At this point, this had been a naval operation because they had been after the gunboats. And so a fellow by the name of Admiral George Coburn was in charge of this operation. So about 5:30 in the morning, August 24th, the British broke camp and they started marching in the direction of Bladensburg, Maryland. What are the Americans doing? They're watching. Well, yes and no, you know, we're chuckling here because it's hindsight. The Secretary of War they're not coming. They're going to go to Annapolis, they're going to go to Baltimore, they may even go up to Philadelphia, but they are not coming to the city of Washington. So they watched. They got there, and Ross had about a quarter of his troops at that point. And he looked up and he saw the Americans gathering on the hillside, and they were very unorganized. He saw some of the batteries set up by the Baltimore folks. And he looked around and he ordered charge. And he ordered his men to go across the Eastern Branch River, which was very shallow. I mean, it probably didn't come up to your waist. And there was a bridge there. So he ordered his troops across the bridge and across the river. Well, the Baltimore forces were set up and they repelled them right away. They just mowed the British down. So Ross calls them back. He waits for the rest of his troops to arrive. So when the rest of the forces of the British arrived, Ross looked the situation over and just said, "Charge." And they never stopped coming. They just went forward and forward and forward. And the lines broke. And General Winder could not control the lines. They started heading back toward Baltimore, toward Tenleytown, which was above Georgetown, or back toward the capital city itself. He did his best for an hour or so to control the lines, but the British just kept coming. At that point, Charles Carroll, who lived at Bellevue, said, "Dolly, I'll get the carriage, let's go." And this is the famous story of Dolly and the painting. And Dolly says to Charles Carroll, "No, I'm going to see about this painting of George Washington." Dolly is in a hurry. I mean, she thinks those British are going to enter the White House any minute. So what she does, and this is in several accounts, and one of the accounts is in her words, she orders that the outside of the frame be broken, and the painting is taken out of the outside frame and laid on the floor. Why do I think the painting, while it is still on the wall, Dolly had the table set for 40 people. And there was supposed to be a victory celebration at the White House later. So she had cooked a lot of very fine food for the celebration. She had the best china out, the best glass, Madison's best wines, and there was going to be this wonderful celebration. And I think she left the painting on the wall so that Washington would be part of the celebration when we defeated the British again. But anyhow, she saves the painting, the table is still set, and she leaves with Charles Carroll and goes up to Tenleytown. And Dolly was not just traveling by herself, she had a whole caravan of people. She had her sister, her sister's children, her sister's husband. They picked up people on the way. You know, it just wasn't Dolly hopping in a carriage and off she goes. This was a well-planned caravan of refugees, sort of escapees. They went down to the Georgetown ferry and found that the president had already crossed the river. They went down Canal Road to Chain Bridge, took Chain Bridge, which at that time was planks supported by chains, crossed Chain Bridge, went up the very steep Chain Bridge hill, and turned off at a place called Rokeby. And that was a place that was friends of hers. The British did not enter the city of Washington until dusk. So there's no daylight savings time. It's August, so I'm ballparking it at 7:30 in the evening. They entered the city. It was only 200, and it was British officers that entered the city. They were the ones that did all the damage that night. They went down, when they didn't get the white flag, they went down Maryland Avenue to the Capitol building. They roamed the Capitol building for an hour or so. They found it very difficult to ignite. And so they took a lot of furniture and piled it up, desks, chairs, and whatever, and they took the powder from their Congreve rockets and sprinkled it all around, shot the rockets into the pile of furniture, and set the U.S. Capitol building on fire. At that point, Commander Thomas Tenji at the Navy Yard was under orders from the Secretary of Navy. Remember, he had those ships blown up. He's now told Tenji that if the British came into the city, Tenji was to blow up our Navy Yard. You know, we're doing more damage than the British, to be honest with you. We've also blown up a couple of bridges that were across the Eastern Branch River. Those were privately owned, so the stockholders, I mean, they lost everything when we blew those bridges up. But Tenji, once the U.S. Capitol building was on fire, he ignited the Navy Yard. The British marched down to the White House, and they're very surprised to see this wonderful feast that's laid on the table.
Did anybody eat that food?
They sat down and they roamed the White House for about an hour and took souvenirs, and they sat down and drank the wine and ate the meal. And then they torched the White House. They torched the Treasury building next to the White House. And about that point, a huge storm came up. It was a storm with a lot of lightning, a lot of thunder, and a tremendous amount of rain. And accounts that people wrote say that they thought that the entire city would have burned if it had not been for that storm. They did not come to occupy the city, they came to destroy the city. That had been accomplished. So they were only there 24 hours. So when dusk came on August 25th, they headed back and took the same route back to their ships that they took coming to the ships. And we made no opposition. And at that point, those 7 ships come up the Potomac River, and Alexandria has a huge price to pay. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Herrick.